Iowa State is going to a bowl game. This we know. Who will Iowa State play in that bowl game? This we don't know. Who does Iowa State want to play in that bowl game? That we find out today.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, now the #1 sports podcast network. I'm your host, Nick Marovitz. Thank you for making this your first watch or listen of the day. I appreciate it more than you know. Be sure to hit subscribe so we can prove once and for all that it is, in fact, a Cyclone state, as today we make our way back to football. That's right. We're going to start today's show talking about who could Iowa State play in their upcoming bowl game and who should they want to play. We're going to attack this from a lot of different angles, so we're going to go ahead and start there. Then we're going to kind of take a look at this season. It's not over yet, but it certainly hasn't gotten up to the expectations that I set prior to the year. It's not a disappointment, but it just didn't quite meet those expectations. How close was Iowa State to meeting those expectations? Probably closer than you think. Then finally, to round out today's episode, as I said, the season's not over. Still 2 games remaining. What are the expectations for Iowa State through those 2 games? I will lay those out right here today. Now, those could shift, but as of right now, what my expectations are will come in the 3rd segment. So stick around for that. I can't wait to get into all that, right? All the projections of the next 2 weeks, because the season isn't over. We still get to watch Iowa State play through those 2 games, but we do have to start today's episode with the bowl games. Now, we're going to get into why this is particularly on the top of my mind in a second here, but I'm going to go ahead and start with the current projections for Iowa State in their bowl game situation. All right. Iowa State earned their 6th win over TCU, and now they've opened up this whole new book of possibilities. Who could Iowa State play? Where will it be? All these fun kinds of conversations are being had. Memphis is being brought up a lot. I joke. That's not necessarily entirely true. But I took a look at the Big 12 website. There are a handful of bowls that Iowa State could go to. Obviously, we all know them, but I'm going to lay them out really quickly. The Valero Alamo Bowl, the Pop-Tarts Bowl, what Iowa State was in last season, the Kinder's Texas Bowl, the AutoZone Liberty Bowl, the Rate Bowl, the Radiant Technologies Independence Bowl. I believe that's in, what is that, Shreveport? Shreveport? Okay, interesting. Nonetheless, I think I know where Iowa State's going to go. At least my prediction. And I think I know who I want them to play. But there are plenty of other, sports writing columns, I guess, or potentially journalists, or however you want to look at it, that are making projections. And they're not exactly aligned with myself. So I want to throw those out there so you can at least hear them, right? At least we walk through all of the possibilities, or at least the thoughts out there. We're going to go ahead and start with ESPN kind of has Iowa State going to the Texas Bowl or the Liberty Bowl against Oklahoma or Kentucky. All right, that'll be a fun one, an SEC type situation. CBS has Iowa State playing Minnesota in the Rate Bowl. I think I like that one. Not quite sure yet. The Athletic has Iowa State playing Missouri in the Texas Bowl. Okay, so another SEC team, but a little bit different, not Oklahoma. Then the Sports Illustrated, USA Today, and Athlon all have Iowa State playing Northwestern in the Rate Bowl. We'll get into my favorite here in a second. But first, I'd like to just lay out what we're looking at with a few of these teams in case you haven't kept up. Oklahoma currently 7-2, 7th in the SEC, losses to Texas and Ole Miss. They play Alabama, Missouri, and LSU the rest of the way. Kentucky, if my computer would load that page, would be super helpful. Currently 4-5, so not yet bowl eligible, 12th in the SEC, but they do play Tennessee Tech because the SEC does that fun thing where they basically take a bye in the middle of November. That's their next game. Then they'll play Vanderbilt and Louisville. Definitely not ideal, but a big win over Florida, 38-7, has set the stage a little bit. Certainly opens up that door to potentially get 2 wins the rest of the way of their through their last 3 games. Third up here, I have Minnesota, 6-3, 6th in the Big Ten. Notable big loss to Iowa, 41-3. Also lost to California and Ohio State. The Ohio State one was pretty ugly. So was the Iowa one, though. I mean, it's 41-3. Into Iowa, we're going to move on from that. Next up, I've got Missouri, if you will. Started the season kind of hot, but ended up losing to Alabama by a field goal, and then on a little bit of a down streak right now. Injuries could be to blame, but we'll see where Missouri ends up. Still bowl eligible right now, though, 6-3. And finally, Northwestern, 5-4. They need one more win with losses to Nebraska, USC, Oregon, Tulane to start the season. That Tulane one, boy, I thought Tulane was really going to go on a bit of a hot streak this season because of that win. But nonetheless, Northwestern finds themselves with Michigan, Minnesota, and Illinois to round out the season, only needing one more win. Very possible. I look towards that Minnesota game more than likely to get that sixth win. But where does Iowa State fall into all of this? And why is this on the top of my mind? Well, Jamie Pollard at IA State AD on the X or Twitter situation. If you want to follow me at Nick_Marv, that's completely free on there. But Jamie Pollard stopped by the Fiesta Bowl offices to discuss Iowa State's interest in bringing the Cyclones to the Rate Bowl in Phoenix on December 26th. He says, would love the opportunity to play a Big Ten school. So it got me thinking, right? Who does Iowa State want to play? Who could they play? Yeah, they could play in the Texas, the Liberty, the Rate Bowl, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Minnesota, Missouri, Northwestern. All of these teams are very possible, right? These are things that could happen. We are not quite yet sure what will happen. But who does Iowa State want out of all of those options? Well, Iowa State would likely want a win against a team that is perceived to be very good. Now, are they actually very good? Bowl games are very interesting in that regard, right? Who is playing? How much are they playing, right? Last season, I think we all remember what happened against Miami. Wouldn't really matter in my opinion, but that's just here at Locked On Cyclones. Nonetheless, I think Iowa State's going to want to win, but they don't want it over some nobody. They want it over a good team. I took a look at the wins that Iowa State has in their bowl games over the last few years. They've beaten a Big East team, a MAC team, a Pac-12 team, an American team, be like, AAC or whatever, American now, and then an ACC last year in Miami and a Big Ten team. So not exactly a super notable bowl win resume. I'm just being completely transparent. Now, every bowl win I feel like is worth a lot. But if you're comparing, the Big 12 to the Big 10 or the Big 12 to the SEC, as we do day in and day out when it comes to the college football playoff situation, having some more bowl wins over those types of conferences certainly helps. And I argued heavily last season that the win over Miami was a huge stepping stone for the Big 12 to cement itself, if not as, just as good as the Big 10 and the SEC, certainly not worse than the ACC. And I think that has stood true. Not just because of the Iowa State win over Miami, certainly no, but I think that just the SEC or the Big 12 is better than the ACC, especially this season. The ACC is a crazy conference right now. Looking at all of these teams, the other consideration you have to make is just that. How does the Big 12 match up against the Big 10, the SEC, the ACC? Well, right now, really Iowa State's looking at a Big 10 or an SEC school. That's kind of the projection that Iowa State is landing into. And between the two camps, I think you're more than likely going to want to end up with a Big 10 team with the projections that Iowa State has. Northwestern, I think, is a very winnable game. And I think Minnesota is more than likely even more winnable because, you gave up 41 points to Iowa. Look, it's just kind of what it is. We're going to move on, right? The SEC, however, like Oklahoma, would be a really fun one. I don't think it's like the most favorable matchup for Iowa State. All right, I've got a minute here, so I'm not going to dive into that. I don't love that one. I do think Missouri, very winnable game. Kentucky, if that were to play out, obviously needing 2 more wins the rest of the way, they would be kind of hot, right? They would be essentially through their last 5 games, they would have at least 4 wins. More than likely 5 if they got hot at the right time. Is that a team you want to play in the bowl game? Iowa State struggling with some momentum issues, maybe with 2 wins the last 2 weeks of the season, feeling better, maybe, right? But it's just not exactly, you never really know. You don't want to face a team with a lot of momentum. Me personally, I would like Iowa State to play Minnesota in the Rate Bowl. I think that's a win over a Big 10 team. That helps the Big 12 versus the Big 10 kind of narrative. Obviously, Iowa State is cementing themselves against Iowa. I think it's pretty clear. Obviously, I heard you click the subscribe button down below to prove it's a Cyclone State, but we're seeing it play out on the court, on the field, on the what else do they play? The course? Maybe the course. Does that work? Everywhere Iowa State is beating Iowa. So that's helping in the Big 12 versus Big 10 department. But I think Minnesota would be another opportunity for Iowa State to do that. I think they could do it against Northwestern as well. I just personally, when I look at the two, I lean Minnesota. Now, Iowa State making a bowl game. Tremendous achievement, right? You get to 6 wins, especially what Iowa State has been through this season. But before the season, I honestly had expectations of at least the Big 12 title game. How close was Iowa State to achieving those? We're going to talk about that coming up right here after this. It is almost the weekend. It's time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order. These players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For Iowa State, I'm looking Trey Bell's way. Okay, interception, forced fumble. The interception to set the tone against TCU. Say, hey, this is a no-fly zone, my friend. I don't know what you thought this was. It's not going to be that easy. And then the forced fumble at the end of the game, just when TCU thought they had a chance, Trey Bell steps up big time for the Cyclones. And just like Trey Bell delivered for Iowa State, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday you order. Stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through 11/18. I honestly had Iowa State's ceiling at, I think it was 11 wins this season. And I wouldn't have been too shocked had they walked away with a perfect season. But, sometimes you just got to keep yourself in check, right? Yeah, you guys can see the backdrop behind me. This is, in fact, Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now the #1 sports podcast network. I'm going to be rooting for Iowa State to go undefeated. I think we've made that very clear here. So I took a step back and said, all right, it's reasonable to assume that Iowa State would lose a game. And I think it was after Bear Bachmeier was named the quarterback at BYU that I said, I'm going to move their floor to 9 wins. I think they can easily achieve 9 wins. Well, I didn't exactly see the amount of injuries coming, specifically in the secondary. That was pretty ugly. It escalated quite quickly. And Iowa State now finds themselves with 6 wins and 2 games to go. So in the regular season, the best Iowa State can do is 8 wins. Now, is that a disappointment? No, it is not. Even if Iowa State ends up with 6 wins and drops their last 2, I wouldn't call this season a disappointment. I wouldn't say that. Just when you consider all of the factors, you beat Iowa, you start 5-0, and you end up beating TCU, a game you weren't supposed to win on the road to make bowl eligibility. I mean, yes, it was a good year. It really was. Just wasn't quite what I thought it would be. And that's just me personally, right? I'm sure there were plenty of people out there who are looking back at me now, back at what I said, saying, this guy doesn't know his ball. This guy doesn't know ball. I mean, what's he talking about? 11 wins for an Iowa State team? This is his first year as a fan? I mean, I'm sure those conversations are being had, and those people are valid to think that. All right, but let's go ahead and break down why I think, or not necessarily why I think that they ended up coming up short, but just how close were they? Because I do think Iowa State was closer than maybe we at this point are assuming they were, or at least it feels that they were. The 4 straight losses, I mean, that it was easy. It really did feel like it was just spiraling out of control, right? But the 5 straight wins, I thought Iowa State was in a great spot to start this season, and I think that's where we're going to start, right? Let's just kind of work our way through it. Iowa State to start the season through our first 2 games, almost flawless, right? The way that I perceived it was everything was good, and the spots where I didn't really love what I saw, I had a very good reason for it. Plus, it's early on in the season, right? And we've had this conversation before because you know what? You know exactly what I'm going to say. Iowa, it's the Cyhawk game. You move on. You win the Cyhawk game or you lose the Cyhawk game, and then you forget what happened in it. At least from a play standpoint. Personally, I just let it go because it's the Cyhawk game. It's a tough, hard-nosed, hard-fought battle. It is so emotionally charged. You move on, right? Rocco throws 18 interceptions. It's a Cyhawk game. Rocco throws 24 touchdowns. I hate to say it. It's a Cyhawk game, right? Well, actually, in that case, I probably would freak out a little bit because it's like the anti-narrative. Like 16-13 was the final score. If Rocco threw 24 touchdowns, I probably would lose my mind. Nonetheless, I think really the biggest, first red flag, if you will, was against Arkansas State. And we did write this off, saying that it's the end of that first 4-game stretch. They're on the road. It was super hot. And all those things are true. They certainly are. But there were some red flags early. And I feel like right to be concerned about that. We all remember, but then we also remember how Iowa State responded against Arizona. A dominant win, I felt like. This was really where the injury started to pile up, and we're going to ignore injuries for the sake of this conversation. But this win against Arizona, this turnaround from what Arkansas State was going into the bye, coming out of it and facing Arizona, dominating Arizona with the Kyle Conrarty situation and yada, 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 like it felt really good. It really did feel like Iowa State was going to be that team this season. Now we get into the 4 straight losses against Cincinnati, right? This one was interesting because now we're facing a new Cincinnati, a very good team in the Big 12. We learned that. We certainly did. But we're also facing a new challenge as a team. How are we going to approach, the injury situation defensively? You gave up 38 points to Cincinnati. That's the name of that game. We were essentially one half from beating Cincinnati. It took them a half to figure it out. I think that's pretty close because the second half was so good for Iowa State in that game. Now, offensively, we never really found it. It was pretty much 50-50, if I remember correctly. I want to say it was 6. I'm not going to pull up the exact box score, but it was like 16-14. It was almost dead split on the half. So I'm not going to say the offense was like phenomenal in either half. They scored 30 points, and 30 points should be enough to beat a lot of teams. Just the defense had a rough half. We didn't quite know who they were yet, and they ended up giving up 38 points in that one. And it was a kind of a huge play that set that up to 38. Anyway, you're a half away. Colorado, we're really 2 plays away, I would say. And it was a communication error on one of them. And we aren't even going to talk about the flag that wasn't thrown for a tackle in the end zone. We're just going to keep it vague. But look, I feel like Iowa State wins that game probably 5 times out of 6 is about the percentage I would put it at. I wouldn't say 9 times out of 10. I don't think this is the 1 time out of 10, but maybe out of 6, right? I feel pretty good about that. They just got a little unlucky. I feel like there was things that didn't go their way. There's a weird situation with the loss to Cincinnati and where are they right now? And Rocco obviously, hasn't been the same since that Cincinnati game. And this is early on in that tenure, right? It is what it is. It was a tough loss to, I'm going to say it, a bad Colorado team. A game they win at least 5 times out of 6. Easily. Feel pretty good about that. Somewhere between 5 out of 6 and 8 out of 9. I wouldn't go 9 out of 10. The loss to BYU. You had them. I mean, they really did. Iowa State really should have won that game. I know it's more than this one play, but I have watched the punt debacle so many times. It makes me sick. It really does. That, in my opinion, I know it's more than one play, but that was the reason Iowa State lost that game. And I get sick because I can see the BYU guy looking at the ball. And they talked about this. I heard it somewhere that BYU saw this on film. And that means that I'm not putting it only on BYU. I'm not saying BYU was the reason I guess I am saying that, but it's not like Iowa State was cheated. Iowa State gave up a tendency. They showed a tendency to not really pay that close of attention to this. So it's their own fault. But you see the BYU player looking at the ball, pulling him into the ball. That is the sole objective. And it ends up happening, right? You're basically that situation away from beating a really good BYU team. And I think if they win that game, they correct course and they figure it out against Arizona State. The Arizona State game was very interesting. Jeff Sims goes into the Arizona State Hall of Fame. I don't know about that's not a great feeling. It's not. But that was a game that I felt like Iowa State was very, very capable of winning. So, I mean, other than Cincinnati, which I will say was like a half of defensive, what's going on here? We're still figuring out Cincinnati. It feels like we're still figuring out ourselves. Iowa State very well probably should have beat Colorado. I think absolutely should have beat BYU. It really comes down to one play. And when it comes down to one play, I know it never comes down to one play, but when it comes down to one play like that, I'm okay with saying they should have won that game. And it's nothing. I'm not saying that they were cheated out of that game. I'm just saying it really came down to that for me. After watching that game multiple times, watching that play, I mean, I'm getting my stomach's turned over thinking about it. And if they win that game, they correct course. Let's just say even if they lost the 2 prior, they beat this BYU team. I think they'd correct course and beat Arizona State. I think they were better that day. They weren't perfect. They only scored 19 points. I understand that. But you were really one play in that one as far as now. I know that drive could have extended itself, but Sims rushing for what was an 88-yard touchdown was kind of the entire story of the second half for Arizona State. I think they had like 3 passes that were, I don't even know if it was 3 passes or 3 complete passes or whatever it was in the second half. Like it was a tale of halves basically in every game in those 4 straight losses. Iowa State was this close. Now, coulda, shoulda, wouldas, horseshoes and hand grenades. I understand that, right? I don't want to sound like an Iowa fan. It's whatever. This is not what happened. But I do want to point out that when we look back on this season and Iowa State, ends up as an 8-win team and they had the 4 straight losses, or, worst case scenario as a 6-win team, they grabbed a win at the end of the season to snag bowl eligibility and think of what they were when they were 5-0. It was a failure of a season. No, it wasn't. They were extremely close to achieving what I thought like they were very capable of doing. They were very, very close. Now, this team, the ball just didn't bounce their way a lot of times, and that's going to happen. Iowa State leads the entire college football, tied with, I believe it's San Jose State, in number of games that came down to 1 possession, 7 games. Both ways, but still, you just don't win them all, right? And some years you do, some years you don't. Some years it's 50-50. This is how this season played out. And that's what it is. But Iowa State was this close. It wasn't like they won games by 80 and they lost games by 80. They were this close in almost every single game. And that's what makes me love the Cyclones more and more every day, right? Like that's why I have an entire wall full of Cyclones stuff. And I plan on getting more. Like I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. We're not Cyclone fans because it's easy. We're Cyclone fans because it's awesome. And that's an awesome season, even though the wins and losses don't exactly show it. Let's go ahead and get into the expectations for the last 2 games, though, for the last segment. Don't go anywhere. Coming up right here after this. The NBA is back, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. There's no better place to get in on the action in the NBA or college football or wherever than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of a game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So Iowa State was extremely close to a phenomenal season, at least on paper, when you look at wins and losses. I just broke down here at Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, now the #1 sports podcast network, why I don't think it really comes down to the wins and losses. I think that this season was still a success. You still got to 6 wins. And we talked about those games and the way that Iowa State has gone through this season and how close they were, pretty much ignoring injury. When you factor that in, Iowa State it's phenomenal what they have done. I know they didn't win every one of those games, but it is phenomenal what this defense has been able to do. And I know the offense hasn't felt it the same, but you can't tell me every one of those guys is at 100%, right? So let's keep that in mind as well. As far as the last 2 games go, just because the season's been good doesn't mean we can write them off. Doesn't mean we can just move on. We're on to next season. I haven't touched any, transfer portal. I haven't touched any, needs for next season, who's staying, who's going, who's committed. I'm focused on this season. I know Matt Campbell is. I know the players are as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at what the expectations are for these last 2 weeks, because it's not like Iowa State's making a run for a Big 12 championship. Iowa State's made their bowl game mark. At this point, you're kind of playing for 8 wins in the regular season. And I don't think, the way I want to approach this is, what do I expect of the offense and what do I expect of the defense? Because Matt Campbell as a head coach, I don't have any expectations. He's going to nail it. It's one of those things where, pretty rarely for myself, can I look at something and go, yeah, I trust you. Go ahead and you got it. I am I think what is that, like type A? Like I want to just do it myself. Like if you just want to do it, just do it. Matt Campbell, trust him completely. Just, you got it. You will coach this team the right way. Your priorities are in order, all this, that, and the other, like all of the ways you could possibly go about it. I trust Matt Campbell. I don't trust Taylor Mauser as much. I love Taylor Mauser. I don't trust him quite as much. So my expectations for the offense for the rest of this season are, I want to see, I don't know an exact number, but I feel like 24 points a game is pretty fair. I feel like that's okay, because you've heard me pound the drum all season long of Iowa State just needs to score more points. They're going to win more games if they score more points. And I mean that because, yes, you need to score more points than your opponent to win games, but also Iowa State's defense isn't exactly this just dominant force. You're going to need to score a lot of points to win games. That's what I mean by that comment. Looking at what Kansas has given up this season, obviously we've got their early games where they give up seven to Fresno State and 7 to Wagner. They give up 31 to Missouri, or 42, to Missouri, 42, 10 to West Virginia, 37 to Cincinnati, okay, 20 to UCF, 42 to both Texas Tech and Kansas State, and 21 to Oklahoma State, 24 to Arizona. I think 24 is a very doable mark. In the Big 12, Kansas has only held opponents to 24 points or less one time. West Virginia and UCF. Iowa State to be that third team, I don't like it. They're very capable on offense of exceeding 24 points. And then the last game of the season is Oklahoma State. I'm not going to go through every one of how many points that they have allowed this season, but they have one win. Like, I'm just going to put it at that. And this is no shot at Oklahoma State. It is just a fact. They are 0-6 in the Big 12. I know it's any given Saturday. It is what it is. Should I point out they gave up 69 points to Oregon? Like, okay. Just take a look for yourself. I'm not going to lay them out. I am lay them out. Yeah. No, I am not going to air out basically dirty laundry here. All right. I feel for all Oklahoma State fans out there. I am not targeting you. I just feel like Iowa State can achieve 24 points against Kansas. And if they can do it against Kansas, they can do it against Oregon State or Oklahoma State. Why am I saying that? Oregon State. Specifically what I want to see from Taylor Mauser, from this offense. Look, the only thing I really am asking for, it's like the one thing I'm asking for Christmas this year, no crazy, wild, random, just outrageous plays in situations where we need a yard, okay? And I will say, the offense, for the most part, been very good this season. For the most part, Mauser's calling very good games. Not always leading to a lot of points, and he's talked about that in his pressers. We've talked about it. I understand it's not always leading to points, but for the most part, Mauser's calling good games. It's just in some, second or third and 5 or, a third and goal, we're running sprint outs. Why are we doing that? Why are we getting cutesy with random, it feels like trick plays at random times on crucial downs? Not necessarily super crucial downs, but important downs. Why are we doing that? Let's stop doing that. I do appreciate, I will say, it feels like, all right, both times Iowa State had a chance to put the game away on a 4th down against Kansas State and TCU at the end of the season. They've done it. At the end of a game, Iowa State has chosen to put the nail in the coffin. And I like that. Like I said, I have nothing against Taylor Mauser. I love Taylor Mauser. I just want to see a few changes. I think 24 points is fair. I think that's a totally reasonable number. And I would also just like to see a little bit, can we not do the crazy stuff? It's fun when it works. Maybe we call it on 1st and 10 early on in the game, right? Maybe we don't wait till it's late. Maybe we don't wait till it's crucial down. If we don't get this one, we're now in a pickle type of situation. Or we get it and we aren't. But if we do, it's like, let's leave it alone. Let's just play the game when it gets down to brass tacks. Defensively, from John Haycock, last week against TCU, I think, honestly, completely turned around everyone's perception of him. The last 4 weeks were very rough prior to last 4 games prior to TCU were very tough on John Haycock. I thought that was a phenomenal showing, not only against a very good TCU team, but considering what he had. So, I don't have a ton of expectations. It would be really cool to shut out Oklahoma State. That's almost impossible to do. Not a big deal. As long as we win that game, right? Hold the opponent to a reasonable amount of points, namely early on in the game where Iowa State can play their style of offense. That's really my big picture takeaway for John Haycock. hold the opponent to a reasonable number of points, namely early on, so Iowa State can play their game. Iowa State can score points the way they want. They aren't forced into one style or another. They're allowed to just do what they want. Now, to an extent, Taylor Mauser, like I said, let's keep it in check, but also then he's not forced to throw or only run or whatever. We've got 3 straight weeks with Carson Hansen at 100 straight yards. Getting 5 would be phenomenal. That'd be really cool, right? I think it's very doable. Very, very doable. Just something to keep in mind. Let me know. What are your expectations for Iowa State? Where do you want them to end up in a bowl game? Where do you think the season falls? It's not over, but I think it's worth noting that it's not a failure, even though they just dropped 4 in a row prior to being TCU. Like, I think there was a lot of that conversation going on. Not a failure. Very, very close to being an extremely successful season for Iowa State. It's been an extremely successful episode. Thank you guys for sticking around to this point. Let's have a great weekend. No football. Still very possible to have a great weekend. Until next time, Cyclone fans, sayonara.